Everybody laughed at Jaguar Wright. They mocked her as a delusional voice lost in her own bitterness. They scoffed, calling her crazy, saying that she was grasping at straws, looking for connections where none existed. The very idea that the entertainment industry, which millions admired and adored, could be so intricately tied to a web of corruption and scandal, well, it seemed absurd. But now, with the release of federal files and millions of classified documents flooding the public eye, the laughter has all but died away. What was once ridiculed as a conspiracy theory is now recognized as a haunting reality. The truth, long buried beneath layers of secrecy and corruption, is finally being unearthed. It all started when the names from the infamous Epstein files resurfaced, catching the world by surprise. Big names, powerful names. And Jaguar, who had warned us for years, was now being vindicated. She had said it before anyone else dared to. She had warned us that the entertainment world, the very glittering industry we all admired, was deeply intertwined with the billionaire class, that it was rotten from the inside out. And now, as the truth pours forth, it's impossible to ignore. She was right all along. There is one particular thread that Jaguar has been pulling on ever since these files were released, one that has captivated her attention more than any other. She's been drawing comparisons between Jeffrey Epstein and one of the most influential figures in the entertainment industry, Diddy Combs. The connection between these two figures isn't just coincidental, it's critical. But what's most chilling is that even as the documents pile up, most people seem to be missing the point. They're not seeing the glaring similarities between Epstein and Diddy, even as the evidence continues to mount. The world is choosing to look away. Jaguar says it's impossible to discuss one without discussing the other. You cannot talk about Epstein and not address Diddy because they both operated within the same dark ecosystem. Epstein exercised his control over the lives of the world's most powerful individuals through his vast wealth, his manipulation of influence, his private planes, and his ability to move within the most elite and secretive circles. He built his empire in shadows, using his connections to stay protected, to keep the darkest parts of his operation hidden from the light of day. On the surface, Diddy's world seemed far removed from Epstein's, yet Jaguar argues they are more connected than anyone cares to admit. Diddy navigated through the realms of music, fashion, and Hollywood's most exclusive rooms. He became an icon, a mogul, an untouchable force in pop culture. But the connections between these two men don't stop there. Jaguar insists that Diddy wasn't simply an isolated figure living in the opulence of his success. He was embedded in a much larger, much more dangerous system. If Epstein could stay protected for so long, his crimes ignored or dismissed, then who else, Jaguar asks, has been shielded from the consequences of their actions? Jaguar is still reeling from the silence surrounding certain individuals, particularly Naomi Campbell. To this day, she cannot fathom why Campbell, who has been so closely tied to these high-profile flight logs and records, has not been scrutinized further. "I'm surprised," Jaguar says, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm bitterly surprised. Naomi Campbell's name is not just a footnote in these records, it's all over them." Her presence in the flight logs, her frequent connections with Epstein's inner circle, is not something that can be casually dismissed. She wasn't just on a few flights or on one or two occasions. No, Naomi Campbell was on many flights. Her name, which once graced magazine covers, was now appearing on some of the most dangerous and shadowy flight logs in history. Yet despite this, the media has failed to raise any significant questions about her involvement. Her name, seemingly buried in plain sight, goes largely unnoticed, and that silence, it speaks volumes. Jaguar also brings up Diddy's ex-girlfriend, whose name also appears in these flight logs. This too raises serious questions. Diddy's connection to Epstein's world wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just about the occasional social gathering or business dealings, it was far deeper than that. The presence of Diddy's ex in the same circles and the same flight records can't be ignored. It isn't just coincidental. It's part of a larger pattern of associations and proximity to power players who, for years, have been protected from scrutiny. Diddy's ex-girlfriend was no stranger to Epstein's world, and her presence in these records speaks to the larger, hidden world that Jaguar has been trying to expose. And yet, despite the weight of all this evidence, the mainstream media remains strangely silent on these connections. There is a conspiracy of omission, Jaguar believes, some names are pushed into the public spotlight while others are kept in the shadows. Why are certain people thrust into the limelight while others are barely mentioned, despite their clear ties to the heart of this scandal? Why does the media continue to focus on the same handful of names while letting the real connections slip through the cracks? Jaguar points out that some of the most puzzling omissions in this case are the people who were once part of Epstein's orbit, people like David Stern, the former NBA commissioner, and Michael Jackson. Their names too appear on these lists, yet the public attention surrounding them has been curiously light. Michael Jackson in particular has been linked to Epstein in ways that are unsettling, yet no real questions have been raised about his involvement. And even though Chris Tucker's name appears, it's the bigger pattern that seems to be missing from the conversation. It's the media's selective focus on certain names, pushing some forward while holding others back, that is truly telling. Jaguar's argument is simple but powerful. It's not about just the names we see or don't see, it's about the larger system of connections, the people who are protected, the ones whose ties to Epstein's world are hidden in plain sight. Some names appear for seemingly trivial reasons, contact information, social proximity, but the deeper connections are what we should be focused on. It's these links, these quiet associations, that expose the vast network of powerful men and women operating under the radar. The question that lingers is clear: who else is part of this network? Who else is still operating under the protective shield that Epstein and Diddy were able to hide behind? And how deep does this web really go? It doesn't automatically suggest wrongdoing, but it certainly raises some very uncomfortable and often chilling questions. Why is it that some names are constantly plastered across headlines, their every action scrutinized by the media, while others remain virtually invisible, hidden from the public eye? Jaguar Wright, now more determined than ever, points to a disturbing truth. There are names on these lists, names that once held power, influence, and the trust of the public, who are no longer here. People like David Stern, the NBA commissioner whose passing still resonates in the sports world, and Michael Jackson, whose name on this list seems not only unexpected but almost unfathomable. How could a figure so universally beloved, so intrinsically tied to the music industry and global culture, have any association with Epstein's world? Yet there it is. And then there's Chris Tucker, the actor and comedian, a name that, like so many others, appears on the list without explanation. What does this mean? Why is the public not asking the right questions? It's almost as if these names are being kept in the dark, deliberately downplayed, while others are given far more attention. Jaguar is left dumbfounded by the silence surrounding certain figures, the glaring omissions in the conversation. Naomi Campbell's name, for instance, appears repeatedly in the flight records associated with Epstein. Yet despite this clear link, the media has done little to explore her involvement, or more tellingly, her proximity to Epstein's dangerous world. "I'm surprised," Jaguar says with a bitter sense of disbelief. "I'm bitterly surprised." Naomi Campbell wasn't just a casual passenger on a few flights. Her name appears on many of these records. It's not just an isolated event, it's a consistent presence in the documents. And yet the world has barely paid attention. Why? Could it be that the powerful want to keep this quiet, to shield the most glamorous and untouchable from the consequences of their connections? Jaguar can't shake the feeling that there's something deeply sinister at play, a system of protection that allows certain figures to remain untouched, no matter the evidence stacked against them. Jaguar doesn't stop there. She points out Diddy's ex-girlfriend, whose presence on these flight records only deepens the mystery. The connections between Diddy's world and Epstein's world aren't simply coincidental, they're part of a much larger, more complicated web. Diddy wasn't an isolated figure making questionable choices behind closed doors. No, he was part of a vast, shadowy network that operated above the law, protected by powerful figures in Hollywood, fashion, and beyond. And his ex-girlfriend, a high-profile individual in her own right, being caught in this web raises even more unsettling questions. What was her involvement? Was she aware of the dark dealings happening around her, or was she another pawn in a game played by the elite? Jaguar's frustration builds as she watches the media spin their narrative, giving some names undue attention while allowing others to quietly fade into the background. The issue isn't just the people who are named, it's the entire network that exists behind those. See names, there's a reason why some figures seem to appear in every corner of Epstein's world, while others are barely mentioned. This isn't a coincidence, it's part of a deliberate system. This system has allowed certain names to operate freely unchecked because they had the protection of those at the top, the kind of protection that goes beyond money, beyond fame, and into the realm of influence, power, and silence. Jaguar points to people like Jay-Z and Shan Carter, who, despite their clear connections to this web, have been curiously overlooked. These are not minor figures, they are global icons in their own right. So why has the media been so quick to overlook them? Why has their connection to Epstein's network been ignored? Jaguar believes it's part of a larger cover-up, a decision by the media and the powers that be to focus only on certain people, pushing others out of the public eye. The public is being conditioned to ignore the deeper, more sinister connections that exist beneath the surface, to focus only on the names that serve a specific narrative, while the truth about the broader network is buried. The sheer scope of these connections becomes undeniable when you consider the names that appear and the context surrounding their inclusion. Names like Elon Musk have also surfaced in rumors about their involvement with Epstein. Bill Gates, who has already admitted to meeting Epstein, is another prominent figure whose name continues to resurface in the conversation. One of the most disturbing revelations to come out of these documents is a draft email written by Epstein in 2013 to Bill Gates. In it, Epstein accuses Gates of trying to distance himself from their friendship and of asking Epstein to delete all past communications between them. Why would Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, feel the need to erase any trace of his relationship with Epstein? What could have been so incriminating in those communications? The contents of the email are not just suspicious, they suggest that there is far more to this story than anyone is willing to admit. The email draft is chilling. Epstein writes, accusing Gates of trying to cover up something by asking him to delete emails that apparently contain deeply personal and troubling exchanges. Epstein goes on to mention an odd request from Gates for antibiotics, which Epstein allegedly supplied to him so he could secretly administer them to Melinda Gates. The erratic tone of the email only adds to the confusion and suspicion. Why would someone like Gates be involved in such bizarre and seemingly irrelevant requests? What was Epstein really doing for him? The email's contents are deeply unsettling and suggest a much larger, more sinister narrative that has yet to be fully exposed. But the story doesn't end there. In another email draft, Epstein discusses his involvement with Gates's longtime science advisor, Boris Nikolic. Epstein describes his role in helping Gates handle marital disputes and providing drugs to deal with the fallout from these issues. The tone of the email is disturbing. It speaks to a pattern of enabling, of covering up the most scandalous behaviors, and of offering protection to those in the highest echelons of power. This isn't just about one man, Epstein. This is about a system that facilitates the darkest corners of human behavior, a system that helps the most powerful figures in the world stay above the law, while the rest of the world is left to pick up the pieces. These revelations, these glimpses into the world of Epstein and the powerful men and women who surrounded him, are chilling. They paint a picture of a system built on secrecy, manipulation, and control. These individuals weren't just isolated figures making bad decisions. They were part of an intricate network that protected and enabled each other, no matter the cost. The more we learn, the more we realize how deep this web goes, and how many people, from the entertainment industry to the highest offices of power, are connected to it. As the truth continues to unfold, the question becomes, how many more powerful figures are involved in this network? And how long will the system continue to protect them? Epstein wasn't just some random figure in a world of excess and power. He was deeply entrenched in operations that went far beyond simple manipulation or coercion. He was part of a vast, shadowy network that was far more complex and insidious than anyone could have imagined. With his connections to some of the world's most powerful men, like Bill Gates, it's clear that Epstein was not an isolated individual operating in the dark. No, he was a cog in a much larger, much more dangerous system, a system that was built on blackmail, influence, and protection. Powerful people whose decisions shaped economies, societies, and entire industries could act with impunity because there was always someone behind the scenes willing to cover for them, whether through bribes, silence, or worse. The system enabled the elite to operate above the law without fear of repercussions. The power to act without consequence was its true currency. But with all this power came an inevitable consequence, the need to silence those who threaten the status quo. And that brings us to the most controversial and unsettling aspect of Epstein's story, his death. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Epstein died in his jail cell alone, they say, as the authorities looked the other way. But the details surrounding his death raise far more questions than they answer. The missing surveillance footage, the malfunctioning cameras, the guards who allegedly fell asleep during the most critical moment. Every part of the story has holes, and they're too large to ignore. It's almost as if the world was being told one thing while the truth was being carefully hidden. Michael Francis, a former mobster with intimate knowledge of the very jail cell where Epstein was held, is unshakable in his belief that Epstein did not take his own life. "I've spent months in those cells," Michael says, his voice calm but resolute. "There's no way, nothing from the ceiling, nothing from the bed. It's physically impossible to commit suicide in that cell." His words carry weight not just because of his past, but because he knows the system from the inside out. And he's not alone in his conviction. There are countless others who share his skepticism. The chain of events surrounding Epstein's death is riddled with contradictions, from the missing footage to the bizarre lapses in security that night. All of it fuels the growing suspicion that Epstein wasn't allowed to die by his own hand. No, there was someone or something pulling the strings to make sure the truth stayed buried. Michael elaborates further, saying, "It doesn't add up, everything around this man's operation. There's no way he was working alone. Epstein had cameras in every room, every bedroom. He was always watching, always documenting. And now all of it's gone, every piece of evidence he might have had on the most powerful people in the world, all erased in the blink of an eye. That doesn't happen by accident." And so the lingering question remains. Was it really a suicide, or was Epstein's silence to prevent even more explosive revelations from emerging? What if Epstein's death wasn't just an act of desperation, but a calculated move to protect the elite who stood behind him? If he had information that could bring down some of the most powerful figures in the world, then his death, whether at his own hand or someone else's, served a very specific purpose: to shut him up before he could talk. What does that mean for the others who were tied to Epstein? What lengths will the system go to in order to protect the powerful? Jaguar Wright, who has been pointing out these patterns and discrepancies for years, is now watching as the truth slowly emerges from the shadows. With federal investigations underway and documents that were once sealed now flooding the public domain, it seems Jaguar wasn't just shouting into the void all this time. Perhaps she was just ahead of the curve. The connections between Epstein, Diddy, and the powerful figures they were linked to are far-reaching, and the system that protected them is unraveling piece by piece. As more revelations come to light, the question becomes less about what we already know and more about what has yet to be uncovered. The system that enabled Epstein and his associates to operate without fear is now under intense scrutiny. But will it be enough to expose the true extent of the corruption? Will the system finally be held accountable? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the truth is coming, and it's far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The big question now looms over everything: who else is involved? How far does this web of deceit, corruption, and power stretch? If Diddy was truly part of this massive network, if he operated under the same protection system that allowed Epstein to live without consequence for so long, then this story is far bigger than any of us could have imagined. It's not just a matter of one man or even a small group. It's about an entire structure that protects the most influential and powerful figures in the world. We're talking about a network that's been operating behind the scenes for decades, shaping the fates of industries, politicians, and high-profile figures while remaining hidden from public view. If Diddy is a piece of this puzzle, there are others who may never have been exposed, whose names could topple entire empires. Les Wexner, another figure deeply tied to Epstein, is one of the first to face the consequences of his associations. The House Oversight Committee has called him in for questioning, a move that should have come much earlier, but it's still a rare and significant step for someone of his stature. The fact that Wexner, a billionaire mogul who once held immense power and influence, is now sitting under the scrutiny of government officials speaks volumes. But what's even more shocking and more mysterious is the bizarre and chilling response from Wexner's lawyer. Allegedly, during a meeting, the lawyer threatened to take his own life, an action that has only intensified the suspicion surrounding this case. Why would someone with such a high-profile position react so dramatically? What could be so overwhelming in the face of this investigation that it would lead to such an extreme gesture? Is it an attempt to suppress information, or is it an acknowledgement of just how deeply involved these men really are? Wexner, who was once one of Epstein's closest benefactors, has repeatedly tried to distance himself from the convicted sex offender. He's attempted to rewrite history, claiming that he was unaware of Epstein's activities, but the truth is much more complex. Wexner didn't just fund Epstein's rise to power, he made him wealthy. It was Wexner who provided the financial backing, the trust, and the platform Epstein needed to manipulate the lives of countless individuals. And as the relationship between these two men unravels in the public eye, Wexner's carefully crafted legacy as a business titan is beginning to crumble. His wealth, his success, none of it can shield him from the growing storm of revelations. With each new piece of information, Wexner's name becomes more tainted, his empire more fragile. The public is waking up to the truth about the lengths Wexner went to protect Epstein. What he did to further Epstein's goals may be the key to understanding how far-reaching this network really was. But this story isn't just about the money, the power, or the influence, though those things are undeniably at play. It's about the protection, the secrecy, and the lengths to which the powerful will go to keep their dirty secrets hidden. The system that protected Epstein, that shielded him from justice for so long, wasn't some random accident or a series of coincidences. It was a system carefully constructed to ensure that those at the top of the pyramid could act with impunity. They were above the law, above the scrutiny of the public eye, and they believed they could operate without fear of exposure. That is the most unsettling part of all, the realization that Epstein was merely a small cog in a much larger machine, a machine designed to enable, to protect, and to cover up. And now, as the walls of that machine begin to crack, the truth is slowly spilling out. But as more documents are released, as more connections come to light, the cover-ups aren't just reactive measures, they are calculated, orchestrated moves by those who are desperate to keep their names clean and their power intact. These individuals didn't just cover their tracks out of fear, they did it out of a need for control, for survival. They knew what was at stake. The protection wasn't just an afterthought, it was embedded in the very fabric of their operations. And now, as the truth becomes harder to ignore, the question shifts: how far will they go to protect themselves? What will they do to stop the truth from coming to light, to prevent the kind of exposure that could destroy everything they've built? As we continue to dig into the connections between Epstein, Diddy, and the powerful figures in their orbit, one thing becomes painfully clear. The cover-ups are not just a reaction to scandal, they are a carefully orchestrated effort to preserve the status quo. The people involved in this network aren't acting out of panic, they're acting with purpose. They are trying to protect the most powerful and influential men and women in the world, even at the cost of truth, justice, and accountability. These actions are part of a broader strategy designed to ensure that the truth never fully comes to light. Every new document that emerges, every name that is revealed adds another piece to this dangerous puzzle. But even as the truth starts to surface, there's still so much we don't know. There are still untold connections, unexplored relationships, and buried secrets waiting to be uncovered. The question remains, who is really pulling the strings behind this network? Who stands at the top, orchestrating the cover-ups, controlling the flow of information, and making sure that certain names never see the light of day? As the Epstein files continue to spill into the public domain, more and more pieces of the puzzle are falling into place. But even as we learn more, there's a nagging feeling that the full extent of this scandal has yet to be revealed. And the biggest question of all looms larger than ever. When all the secrets are finally laid bare, who will be left standing? Will those who thought they were untouchable, those who thought their wealth and influence could protect them forever, finally be held accountable? Or will the system continue to protect them no matter the cost? We're on. Why just beginning to see the cracks in the foundation? And with each new revelation, the story becomes even more complex and even more dangerous.